Hello and welcome to another LinkedIn Live brought to you by Ambition Group. I'm Kyle Winterbottom, your host, and today I'm delighted to be joined by three, maybe four great panelists as we discuss all about successful AI adoption. So as always, we want to make this as engaging as possible. So please get your questions in the comments section on LinkedIn. We'll try to get them answered, or as many of them answered as we can as we go throughout the session. So without further ado, I'll bring our panelists up and let them introduce themselves. Hi all, how are we?
Good, thank you.
Good. So thank you all for joining us. We've got Indy, we've got Alex, we've got Greg. Hopefully we'll have Steve at some point soon, but maybe not. Probably having issues getting in. Not as many issues as you've got, Greg. Look like you're in prison, so you're probably expecting that. But yeah, where we always start, let's do a quick round of intros, then we can jump into the meat of the topic today. Alex, you're my top right, so kick us off if you would.
Sure, Carl. So I'm Alex Sidgreaves. I'm Chief Data Officer at Zurich Insurance.
Nice. Thank you very much. Indy?
Hi, I'm Indy. I'm Chief Data Officer, RSA, UK and International.
Very good. Greg?
I'm Greg Freeman, CEO and founder of Data Literacy Academy, where we help large financial services organizations, amongst others, to roll out data literacy and culture programs across the wider organization.
Nice. Cool. So I've got a raft of questions lined up that I'm keen to ask you all. I'm sure the audience will have a ton of questions as we kind of go through the session today. So as always, get your questions in, please, everybody. I think obviously successful AI adoption, all the rage now. We're kind of, so much talk about it, generative AI, we're into the world of agentic AI and all kinds of things going on there. One of the things that we do want to tackle early on is, the age-old adage of aligning any type of initiative, but especially an AI initiative, to a business goal and or a business strategy. Greg, I'll come to you first on that because I guess you, like me, probably have a slightly broader experience in the sense of that you'll be working with a variety of different businesses. Is there any kind of hints and tips around there, around, I guess, best practice, how businesses tend to be going about doing this in terms of aligning it back to the business strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to do, and this is always the topic of choice, right, is how do we actually make this valuable to the organization? It's actually why Data Literacy Academy exists, because a few years ago, I saw very clearly that as much as people were doing stuff with data, not many people actually realized why it was valuable or understood why it was valuable. And I think the same is happening and about to happen with AI. The gap between expectation and reality is still quite large, and therefore people in the business side end up quite dissatisfied because it's expensive. And so the only way to really go about making it effective is to ensure that it's understood on the business side of the organization by aligning it to the things that they understand. And I think typically business leaders, commercial leaders, that's obviously my background and your background, don't particularly care that much about data and AI as a topic. What they care about is how it enables the pillars, the goals that they've got. And the best way I've found to do it, simple tip, ask them. So we all know that the strategy on the website, the big pretty one that was probably signed off in about 2019, pre-COVID, we're still going 2030 plan, probably doesn't reflect what they care about today. Things change so rapidly in large organizations, the team rotates, and all of a sudden we've got a new set of priorities. The only thing to do, and going back, Kyle, to that webinar LinkedIn Live you did with AXA, that was a really good one, I thought, just in terms of still very much insurance related, where he said, look, you've just got to have conversations, sit them down, like prod their brain for what they care about, what their challenges are right now, and work out not what their operational pains are, the headaches that they typically bring to you on the surface, but what are the strategic things that are going to move the needle for their scorecard. And anything that moves the needle from the scorecard is going to be beneficial and is going to win hearts and minds. So I think that's number one. Don't just depend on the corporate strategy that everyone can see in the world, but speak to people, have conversations, make it all about them, and that's the first trick.
Yeah, nice. Indy, Alex, we've got kind of opposites end of the spectrum here. Alex, I think you've been at Zurich for 20 years-ish, give or take. Have I got that right? Yeah, sorry to age you there. Indy, you've obviously you've been at RSA for a year, so you're both kind of inside big complex organizations where this is undoubtedly going to be in the topic, but Alex, this has come now after such a long time in the business, whereas Indy, you've kind of inherited this as it kind of is, coming into organizations as of right now. Indy, I'll come to you first. What is it about kind of successfully getting AI to work for a business? Let's say, like, how have you gone about aligning that with the business strategy, the business goals, etc.?
I think I'm in a very fortunate position, and I have said this to you, Kyle, even before. I think RSA, if you see, we are part of the Intact Financial Corporation, who are the biggest insurance player in Canada, and they're also worldwide now with acquiring RSA and the other parts in Europe. So I think if you look at how they have become one of the global leaders, but also the most important player in Canadian market is leveraging data and AI for risk selection and pricing. And over years, they have made investments in data and AI, where now I could see that we are deploying third generation AI and ML models. So that's how big it is. I mean, we have 600 plus people in our data and AI lab from Intact Group. So I think I'm in a very fortunate position because with RSA, I think we understand that data is a key enabler to unlock value in terms of the strategic roadmap. It's not the big corporate, map alone, but even in terms of all the goals and plans of how to achieve it, the path to green. I think data underpins rightly every single strategic objective and the business outcome we outline. And we work as a coherent hand-in-glove situation with all parts of the technology and business transformation offices to make sure that we rightly embed the foundations of data and AI, so we are successful together. So we are always outcome-based, but also we have a precedent here to understand why we'll be successful and how we can be successful. That's why I'm saying I think I'm in a very fortunate situation, and this game, although new to me, is not new for RSA or for Intact Group. So underpinning business outcomes, as everybody would agree, is key, but also having that precedent makes it more viable, I think. And it's not a difficult situation to handle because business understand, because they have seen those multi-year incremental benefit. So we have around 80 million plus over the years benefits of AI and ML adoption.
Oh, nice. Interesting. Well, I mean, that'll help, right? With adoption. Just show them £80 million and there you go. Yeah, it'll be adopted, no doubt. Alex, keen to get your thoughts on here, and then we'll jump into Lynn's question because Lynn's got an excellent question. But Alex.
So I massively agree with what Greg said about have a conversation. There couldn't be anything more important than really understanding those stakeholders. I think a couple of things I call out where adoption's been really successful is cross-functional teams. So it's not, the business shouldn't be an end result of something you give them. They should be a part of what you're building the whole way through. They understand it. I think it also gives you the ability to really understand what you're going to measure the impacts and how you know what you're going to deliver is going to be successful, as well as the fact that it builds that trust, which is key in adoption and actually making that happen. I think the other thing that's really important is not having a one-size-fits-all approach to tools. So if you really want to be successful with adoption when it comes to being value for your business, don't be in the position where you're giving one tool to the whole organization. It was a really good example. I heard somebody talking about they rolled Microsoft Copilot out across the entire organisation. 6 months later, only 20% of the organisation were using it. So the adoption just wasn't there. So I think the more you can be specific about the tool, what problem it's solving, the more you can work with the business, and the more you can integrate those tools within their normal world, I think that drives successful adoption for me.
Yeah, interesting. Fine. Lynn's asked a very good question, and probably one we should have tried to tackle right at the outset, just to define what we were actually talking about. But Greg, I'll come back to you on this. Lynn's asked, what do we mean by adoption?
Yeah, I think it is a great question. And I think I would say the things that we tend to consider as adoption are actually the proxies for adoption rather than the reality of adoption. So we are all looking for something measurable, right? And the hardest things to measure are decision making and observing decision making, because it happens in real time and nobody can bother to track it on a local level. And mindset and behaviors. So actually, I believe adoption is a mindset and a set of behaviors that leads a person to change the way they operate and the way they act. And I think it's really easy to think about adoption as how many people are logging into your Power BI dashboard, using your AI tool, whatever it might be. But it is really just a proxy, because are they using it in the right way? Are they adopting it to make the right decisions? Those are actually the really hard things to track. And naturally, data professionals want something very measurable and trackable and quite like hard, and you can feel it and taste it. Actually, true so we have, and I know this is obviously just LLM focused, what I'm about to say. It's not the be all and end all of AI, but we have somebody who's basically, his full-time job is just creating kind of models and training models for different things that we're trying to achieve with our business to accelerate. And he's not really a data scientist or anything. He's very passionate about the space, but it's totally worth it because everybody in our business thinks data and AI first. So are they doing an RFP response? How are they using data and AI to enable the bid? Are they putting out a new post in the marketing team? How are they using data and AI to enable the creation and the speed and the optimization of the post? Because everybody's thinking that way and behaving that way, it's worth having somebody dedicated to it. I think, Kyle, we both see a lot of situations where, because the business doesn't think and behave that way, it becomes less valuable to have a load of people who are expensive creating that type of thing. So I think, to Lynn's point, there is a proxy for usage, but actually it's a mindset shift, a behavior shift to make it cultural, to make it the way someone works. And that's true adoption. It's just less measurable and therefore a little bit more frustrating for people.
Yeah, nice point. So usage doesn't necessarily mean adoption in the truest sense. Excellent. Alex, I'll come to you. What do you kind of, what's the measure of adoption for you?
Probably all of the things that were just mentioned that I absolutely can't use to measure adoption, because I am totally a data person. So I think from a measures perspective, absolutely, we would look at usage. We would look at, not just how many times are people logging in, but are they using it more frequently? How long are they using it? Things like that. We would also capture, depending on the tool, what time had been saved by using the tool. But actually, I would say, going a little bit into what was already said, the intangible stuff, the people talking about it, the people raving about it, the people writing stories about it that come up through internal case studies, that's probably true adoption. When you have to stop selling it yourself and your business users are selling it for you, I think that is true adoption to me.
Yeah, nice. Indhira, you got an opinion on this?
Yeah. I mean, I can't agree more, right? I think Alex has summed it up really right well. One small thing, another addition I would add to adoption is how we feel about the change itself, right? That's more important, right? As an employee, how do I feel about this change? Adoption is me feeling that an AI or an ML has solved my problem or saved my time. It's or has made some difference to me in a positive way. That's adoption for me, right? And not just for AI ML, for any change, definitely, right? Like for me, I look at it in a perspective of yes, outcomes, objectives, and everything around it. But in the grand scheme of things, how does it impact positively to people around the table who are actually the users and adopters of this?
Yeah, that's really interesting. VJ's asked a pretty good question. So, Greg, I'll come back to you on this. He said, so are we first tagging a tool or process as AI first, and what is the criteria?
Oh, we're getting into stuff that's a little bit beyond the scope of my world. Yeah, I'll listen to some opinions first and see whether I can form one. But obviously, that's quite a technical data management type process that isn't necessarily my background. So I'll hand over to someone of you.
All right.
Might be able to help.
Indy, go on. Help Greg out here.
I'm just going to be
in
very
prison. He can't answer the questions.
Yeah, look, I'm gonna answer it from a layman term, like, because that's how I would like to see the world, right? Not from one perspective, but from the wider perspective. AI is not one thing, right? There's tools, there's technology, and then there are people, there is process, there's everything, right? So AI, we all talk about AI as like this one thing, because we have this like this great tool which will answer all your questions, so and will do all your things. So we keep probably delineating, right? Like not thinking about AI as multiple things which has multiple facets. So it can be anything. That it is the interception between the human efforts and the actual human. That's how I would term it as, if you see what I mean. It's a gray area, right? So AI is not one thing. And then first of all, tagging a tool or process as AI first, I'm not sure if it is AI first or a data first. It's the chicken and egg situation. It really is what your business outcome is, where your maturity lies.
Yeah.
Some organization have better maturity than the other. So that's how I see it.
Yeah. VJ, if you're hopefully still listening, give us a little bit more context to that question, because I think it's maybe not quite so clear. But I think Alex, he's asking, like, what's the criteria around how we are defining what AI first means? Is it tool or is it process? I think that's what the question is. You want to have a stab at that?
If I think I get the question right, I will try my best. So for me, I don't actually talk about AI at all in these conversations. That comes later. Very much go into the keeping everything as simple as possible. So going back to what the business is trying to solve, what opportunity are they trying to establish? We have this habit. We've done something just recently. We did a number of Kaizens trying to fix a business problem. And I was calling things widgets, because it was intentional. Because the minute you start talking about, we're going to use generative AI, or we're going to use traditional AI, or we're going to use automation, or we're going to do this, people fixate on that as being the answer. So by just being a bit random and calling it a widget, there's something that we want to do here, and this is the outcome that we want to get from it. And then when we understand that, we'll work out from a technology perspective what it is that we use. But I think it is about just having a big bag of tools and then picking out the right one depending on what you need.
Nice. Interesting. The questions are starting to flow now, and as they always do, which then means I don't get to ask mine, which is very selfish of the audience, but I guess we're here for them, so we'll ask their questions first. Jonathan has asked specifically to you, Greg, what's your view on explaining to leaders that AI doesn't solve everything if the underlying data you train your models on isn't very good? How do you help them understand the challenge? I mean, I think we can all have a perspective on that. So, Greg, kick us off.
Fun fact about Jonathan, he's probably the person that I've known longest in the world outside of my direct family. And he's thrown a question my way, which will be valid to everybody, I think. This is a data literacy problem in my opinion, and data literacy and AI literacy shouldn't be two greatly distinguished, because if you don't have data literacy, you're unlikely to be able to jump straight to AI literacy. If people think that either data or AI are going to solve everything, they just don't understand data or AI, right? That's, I think we can all say that. And I think I've always tried to, in a lot of the work we do with leadership, who we don't necessarily expect to fully understand data and AI or feel like they need to. Like it is a bit ethereal when you're not in the details of it. What do you want? You want the outcome. But actually what they understand is people. Okay. So any good leader, anybody who's made it to a certain level in their industry, is a people manager, and probably has been for the last 20 years. So they'll have observed their people go through multiple new journeys: digital transformation, data transformation, now AI transformation. And I'm sure the point that Jonathan's getting at is around things like data quality. And there's another really good question from somebody before Jonathan around what do you consider good data to build AI models on? And I think the obvious answer is data that you trust, but actually it's really data that the audience trusts. And I think that's a thing that's often missed. It's like, we can prove that this data is valid to this percentage every single time. Wonderful. But if they don't trust it as well as they trust the data they've got in a spreadsheet, then you're not going to get anywhere anyway. So I think for me, it's all about how do we communicate to them that their people are going on this journey. The people are part of the data quality problem. The reason they don't trust the data as leaders is because their people are creating rubbishy data every single day. We all know that. So I think a bit of time taken to prove that AI isn't the silver bullet, data isn't the silver bullet, technology isn't the silver bullet, but a lot of the problems they face and a lot of the concerns they've got are people-led and people-created. They kind of then get that because they're like, oh, I understand people. I understand people are the problem. Aren't they always a problem? So yeah, I think putting it in a world they understand, which isn't necessarily data and AI, but is the human beings that they manage and the impact they have on their belief, their trust, and the outputs, that can be something that just moves the needle for them in terms of how they think about the data and AI space.
Nice. Indhira, I'll come to you on this because, as I mentioned earlier, you'll be in the throes of this. 12 months in now, I'm sure you're getting asked all the questions that data and leaders and CDOs get asked, right? You know, like, can we do AI on this, and all these other hilarious things that we get asked. So how are you helping your business stakeholders to understand that, you know, to do AI well, you need to do data well first and foremost? How do you help them understand that challenge?
So definitely. So one thing I always say is get your foundations right? Build your foundations right. Like, you know, and I think I've been very fortunate, as I said to you, because we understand that data is the input and the output for any of the AI models or anything AI, right? So if you don't have trusted, secured data, then it's garbage in, garbage out. Right, it's a very simple concept, but that's how we try to say, like, what you put in is what you get out. If you have trusted data where you train your models on, because your model is good as it is until you deploy it. Once you deploy your model, it's obsolete. Right, so it's more about education and awareness, but also bringing them in the journey very close. So the challenges are more about how can we accelerate, how do we do this better, not about why we do it. For me, so as I said, I'm in a very safe space, I think, of do this, but let's do it really responsibly, but also in a way where we accelerate our business towards leapfrogging efforts. And also, I always say this, AI is not like a magic wand where it gives, you know, where all my wishes, whims and fancies are given. So yeah, so doing the foundation right, making sure that there is you know, education around what we should do and how we should do, and prioritizing and sequencing. That's how I think winning the hearts and minds.
Yeah, fine. Alex, anything to add there on how you kind of articulate to help them understand that challenge?
Do you know what? I think, again, I'm probably in a privileged position because I think insurers understand risk. Business is all about risk. And I think equally, actuarial models have existed for a very, very long time, and they don't work without good data. So I think actually I've always been able to just have really clear conversations with stakeholders in my organisation that if you're having good data and bad data comes from bad process, you can't do this stuff. And actually the positive for me, a real positive for me from a Gen AI perspective was it highlighted the fact that we need to do stuff in data management again, which is always the tough and boring subject that nobody really wants to talk about. So it's not a difficult one, I think, luckily for me, because I just have to explain the risk and they get it. So
yeah, nice. Indy, you were talking quite heavily there about obviously getting the foundations right. Aaron's asked a good question around that in terms of how to enable leaders within an organization to drive an effective agenda to set up those foundations. You got anything to add around maybe the how around that?
The how is I'll double down on bringing them in the journey, not after we embark on the journey, right? It's just doubling up on that, right? Like that's the thing. And data should not be a standalone piece, or AI should not be a standalone piece, right? It should be in your business outcome. So you should that's how we drive an effective agenda. So we are not, and we should not have a separate roadmap to the business roadmap. We are the business roadmap, right? So it's the hand and glove again. And that's how we enable leaders within an organization as to how they will achieve their business outcomes. So I always say this to my leaders, right? Data is not going to take you from 10% profit to 15%, or having a risk modeling effort of this much BPS to this much BPS in pricing. It's more about it'll get you safely and securely to where you want to go if you decide where you want to go. If it's 10 to 15, then we take you from 10 to 15. It's not we'll upskill you from 15 to 20. So data is an enabler to get you to the business outcomes, and that's the agenda, really.
Yeah. Greg, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I guess the first thing is, and I always end up referring to this model one way or another. I just think it's the best description of it I've heard. People obsess over foundations, and they're very necessary, don't get me wrong, but you can spend 2 or 3 years building great foundations only to find yourself out of work and out of luck because you didn't do anything of value in the meantime. And the data industry is really expensive. Like 3 years ago, it was a $272 billion industry. It's probably even big now, would be my assumption. If that doesn't, so Oakland, who've just been acquired by Softcat now, they talk about foundations and that being important, but they also talk about lighthouses. And I think this idea that lighthouses need to be delivered alongside the foundations. Yes, there's foundational work that has to go as a complete consistent that runs throughout your strategy, that runs throughout your timeline and your roadmap. But if you don't deliver the lighthouses, you don't show that ongoing impact, early impact, you will not get them to drive an effective agenda because you've just become a really expensive, boring cost center who only talks about the boring stuff and not the stuff that is actually delivering value. So I think that's a really, really big one.
Yeah. Alex, anything to add to that?
I'm not sure I could say it better than Greg. Actually, I completely agree. You have to have a two-speed approach. Foundations are absolutely important. No data person can tell you foundations are important. They are key to whatever we do. But no business person wants to hear about foundations.
Yeah. 100%. Which I'm going to ask one of my questions now, very selfishly, because this ties into to that. So obviously, there's always trade-offs here, right? Between because what I see a lot of there's a lot of foundation building going on, and then there's a lot of people seeking quick wins, and sometimes those quick wins aren't always aligned to the direction of travel for the strategy. So they tick a box to say we've got a quick win, but actually it's not really helped them in their journey from A to B. Which happens probably more often than people would think. So there's definitely trade-offs there. But Alex, I'll come back to you on that. I guess how do you get that balance right between building the foundations so you've got successful, good data for successful AI and the long-term impact that will bring, but also then delivering something quickly to get the business bought in?
I think accepting that quick wins don't have to necessarily build towards your overall strategy. I think that is okay. just don't make sure that every single thing you do is a quick win, and that every quick win doesn't move you forward.
Yeah.
I think it is all about balance. And I think even if you've got your foundations done, you're still going to have a longer term strategy for AI, which is going to take you time, versus your quick wins in the AI space, which might be more around operational efficiency, or it might just be taking away something that somebody hates to really get them on board with using AI and moving that forward. So I think the key piece in it is understanding that and knowing where the difference lies. But one of the things I like as well is that it doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other. We talk a lot about quick wins versus longer term, but actually more and more, particularly in the AI space, I really like the iterative approach. So we deliver something that's small, that answers a specific problem, but then we build on it, and we might build on it over 2 or 3 years, but we're continuously giving new features, new value to our organisation. So they're seeing it come quickly, but actually over the period of 6 months, 12 months, you've actually delivered a hell of a lot, but you've delivered it in small increments. So it doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's where kind of what I was probably referring to is that reusability of it, right? You know, to kind of avoid the point solutions over and over and over again to prove that it works, but actually you're not building stuff that can be reused, which is
accepting that a couple of those might buy you some really important relationships is absolutely key.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the questions are coming in thick and fast, and I'm very conscious of time, so we'll move on. So John has asked, how are you establishing that education piece around the various AI tools and their appropriate applications? There's significant value opportunity through efficiency and making unstructured data accessible, but there's a key difference between the challenges AI tools could solve and those they should. Great question. Very long question, John. We ran out of space on the screen. So, Greg, I'll come to you because there's a bit around education there, and given what you do, you might be able to help.
Yeah, 100%. I think the root of the question is a good one, and actually, I was going to kind of piggyback off the back of Alex's point there. Anyway, I think the amount, linking it back to foundations and the types of problems they could solve and should solve, they should solve big, scary, high value, like strategic level needle moving problems, right? Actually, the easiest things that any kind of AI solves is the day-to-day rigor, the headaches, the pains. So in the same way as I was going to say to Alex's point, actually, I hate to say it, I think Gen AI is a really good opportunity for data, AI and IT offices to buy themselves loads of time, because they can work on solving the problems, to John's point, in the background that take years of training, years of historical data, testing, all that kind of stuff. Well, actually, they just solve problems on the front end with Gen AI. I think any business that hasn't rolled out Gen AI to the right teams with the right business problems, just like missing a massive trick. And I speak to John loads anyway, and I know that their opinion on it at Day 10 is about like effective quick value supported by a really robust strategy, and that is the way to do it. It's what we've all referred to so far. So spending time and money on the foundational problems that it should solve, big aerial ones that mean that we can deliver new products much more rapidly, whatever it might be, whilst allowing people to use what they understand to be AI today, which really is ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini, whatever it is. I mean, that's the perfect balance. And as much as people love to say, oh, that isn't AI though, that's not really AI, but it's the one we use every day. Now, every time we do a Google search, we get exposed to some sort of artificial intelligence and an LLM model. So I think it's about picking the ones that you should and doing a load of time and money and resource slowly on them to get them right, while you enable the business with the ones that it could solve.
Yeah, interesting. Indy, anything to add there in terms of what you could do versus what you should do?
The education is far and wide, right? Like having literacy, not just on AI and data. So I think I have a very generic opinion on this, because we are trying to establish this as to understand what is required versus what is the art of possibility, right? To Greg's point, right? If we have adopted and used some of these, then it's fantastic, that's on there from get-go. But if there are areas where there are gaps, then that we are addressing that through launching our own academy, some training initiatives, but also like really fishing for like what is interesting for people on the ground, because it's all about what someone's personal interest and how it's aligned to achieve business objectives. Again, circling back on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Alex, anything to add?
Yeah, we established something a few years ago called the Data Science Partner Program that's worked really nicely. Now, this isn't about trying to create an entire workforce of data scientists. That would cause me a nightmare I don't even want to think about. It's more about kind of taking people who are interested through an education piece on what's available, what kind of things can it do, with the view that it puts them back out into the business and they can see opportunities and they can bring things back and we can work with them to then build those in. So that's been really successful for us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Obviously, there's always a kind of slant towards ethics or morals or values also when the kind of could but should question comes up, which we've got a few questions aligned to that a little bit now. So we'll jump into that. Indy, I'll come back to you. Guardrails. What do you think is important when you're kind of putting these tools out into the business?
Oh, there's loads. Don't get me started. So I know, I'm sure, like, all my fellow panelists will agree. They look at data function as like a police office policing whenever there is an AI conversation as to what are you now saying, right? Like, so I do think that when we talk about guardrails, we talk about not just a tool or a technology we implement, but also the process which is implemented on that, and then the frameworks around it, but the data which is the input to that, right? So there is, and also I think they're nicely summing up through responsible AI framework on that as to how we actually need to consider AI in an organization. So we are actually working towards that, like responsibly handling AI for the purposes of it and not deluding from the task away at hand. One. Number two is ethically, are we doing the right thing by using the artificial intelligence, the so-called tools, technologies we use, and also are we using data for the purposes of what we think we should use and not over and above. So I see that as the guardrails, but also specifically if it's Gen AI, it's really important you define what your intended outcome is, and then actually work from your right to left as to why ethically and how ethically, plus what are the uh, things to consider for the specific outcome you want to achieve, because this can quickly scale up into something else which will lead you into the not so controlled environment.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Makes sense. Alex, anything to add to, I guess, considerations around guardrails?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably echo something that Indy said around that this all kind of falls into responsible AI for me as a piece, and responsible AI is not a side of the desk activity. So I have someone who's 100% dedicated role is to look after responsible AI for the organisation. And it's not about saying no, it's about educating them on the risks of what they're looking to do, because absolutely it might be something you build or want to build, but it also might be something you buy, because it doesn't just go one way or the other, it goes both. So understanding exactly the ethics of what you're doing, are we comfortable, is it transparent, can we explain it? Understanding the regulatory standpoint, we're FS organisations, we care about regulation, that's not understood yet, we don't know quite what that's going to look like, but having somebody that can understand, listen to podcasts, speak to the ABI, go on the FCA sprints, belong to government think tanks, government papers, there's so much information out there. It's your responsibility as an organisation to keep up with that stuff and understand where we currently are. But it is absolutely not about saying no, it's about explaining the risk and then the business deciding what level of risk they want to take.
Yeah. Greg, I guess from an education perspective, are you seeing anything work well inside organizations as it relates to, trying to put that kind of governance and risk and ethical guardrails around this stuff?
Yeah, so I'll go with the answer that I was going to go to first, and then I'll come back to that question, because I think that's a different one, but it's the most interesting one of all. So I'll give you a very specific guardrail that I think is super important, and shock, it's going to be a people one. But I think what we miss is what we're trying to teach people about AI. So let's be honest. So Kieran works for ThoughtSpot. They're obviously the AI-led BI experience. Like, that's the concept. Actually, generative AI is probably the simplest concept in data for an end user, right? Like, we've all spent most of our lives Googling. It's just Googling, but more effectively. You ask a bit more of a question, you get more of an answer. Like, it's a super simple concept, right? But actually, it's having people who understand that you can't trust it all. And I'll give you an example of this. We do a lot of our kind of RFP stuff through like enabled by generative AI. And I reviewed one of our team's responses, and our company address was wrong, our company number was wrong. I don't even know if he's on the call, but we'll laugh about it later. And I was like, just out of interest, like, where have you got that from? Because, like, if you just Google company's house, I can tell you what the company address and company number is. And he was like, oh, the model told me that was the answer. And I was like, well, you've got to challenge that. Like, you don't actually get that. That isn't a good use of AI or Gen AI, if I'm honest. Like, just go to Google, do it the old-fashioned way, make sure it's right on company's house. That's the way to solve that problem. Or look at the document that I sent you to answer that question. But that's a different story. So, like, those kind of things, like, how do we challenge it? But what, again, because he is very data and AI literate generally, and he thinks about it in the right way when he's got his head around it, he then went back and asked it, like, where did you get that piece of information from? Turns out it was, like, not really a hallucination, but it had just linked our business name to another address that was in the back end. Like, those types of things are actually a really important guardrail, and they come down to not teaching people how to use ChatGPT, because most people can use ChatGPT or Copilot, but how do I actually critically think about the information that's coming out the other side? Now, to go on to your other question, Kyle, building a data stewardship and ownership program is really hard, because if you live in a world where most people don't care about data, actually getting them to do stuff like, I think it came back in the chat a little while ago about, it was just to getting your stewards and owners to tag data at a line, like item, like a row level. If you can get them to turn up to a community once a month, you're winning, let alone tagging data at a row level. Do you know what I mean? So, like, we've got to make them aware of the value, the opportunity, and the carrot of data before we get effective stewardship and ownership. So I think it's really important not just to think, I hate governance in isolation. I hate it as a topic in isolation. I think it's boring. And therefore, what we've got to do is help people understand the value of data, so they understand things like the value of being FCA compliant, which they do generally within large organizations. And then once you've sold them the carrot of data, they'll buy into the stick and they'll become effective at tagging, slapping their colleagues on the wrist when they see something ethically being done wrong, etc. So yeah, I just think it's a different lens on it, and obviously it's a people lens from our side, but I think they're relevant.
Yeah. A few good questions in the chat still, and I'm conscious of time, so we'll try to get through as many of these as we can. There's a bit of a how question here that's slightly linked to this, that we've been asked about suggestions on how to ensure that sensitive information is excluded from data sets. Alex, is there anything that you can advise around this, like anything that you're doing that tackles this as a kind of how question?
Probably not. I'm not allowed to say no. I mean, all of our information is tagged, so anything that's sensitive will have already been tagged, so it will be excluded if it needs to be so. Okay,
so there you go. Foundations, right? Yeah. Anything else to add?
It's data classification, right? That's why you have a platform governance place, right? Classify data, sensitive, not sensitive, PII data, then because that's how your data product is used, or the data-based ML product is used for your model training. So it is exactly the reason why some of the foundation needs to be right, even to enable AI adoption in the organization.
Yeah.
I also think though it's about knowing the data that you've got. So there will be certain things that are really obviously, classified as POR, right? Your first name and various things like that. Your medical history, for example, would be another one. But actually, it's where you have information that is sensitive that you didn't know it was necessarily going to appear there, and that's when it comes down to really understanding the data that you've got. So one of the ones I would say is always a minefield is claims notes in an insurance work context, because a claims handler can put anything in claims notes, and actually we protect that. We don't bring that into the data products because we just can't be sure what's in there, and then depending on the use case, we will look at it in isolation. So I think, yes, there's some obvious, it's definitely one thing, but it's also being aware of data assembly, because there will be sensitive stuff that you don't necessarily know about.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so understanding the data that's in there, but also having a mechanism by which you classify that. I guess just question at the top of my mind: do you think that more highly regulated industries like yours think about this stuff more?
Probably.
I was just thinking, yeah, because I guess obviously we all know that great data, classified, training the model, better outputs. But if you're not incentivized, or there isn't a massive risk of a big fine and a breach and a slap of the wrist, then maybe businesses aren't as incentivized to get that bit right necessarily.
It's a complete non-negotiable for us, really.
Yeah.
We have no choice.
It's non-negotiable, right? I agree. It's more about even ethically how you do data, right?
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Final question. So Kevin has asked, Kevin, thanks for your question. How to overcome challenges related to business estimations of value related to AI products up front. Oh God, here we go again. I'll come to you first because I know you love tackling this question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the framing of the question is interesting. And I think as long as I'm reading it right, and I'll take it on the angle I'm taking it, if you allow the business to own the estimation single-handedly, it's your fault if you can't meet it. I guess would be the way that I'd look at it. Like we talk about a 3-stage process. I think in this context, it sounds like we've effectively jumped the process right to value realization. And we've maybe done some value hunting. So we talk about value hunting, value forecasting, and value realization. So if you've hunted for the problem, you've got it, which is why there's an estimated value on the return of the AI product. The middle bit, though, the value forecast, where you as the data leader or data professional agree a forecasted value that's mutually signed off between the business stakeholder and then a finance professional as well, somebody that can really kind of test the numbers, push whether they believe this is a number that somebody's made up in data or they've made it up in the business side. If that becomes mutually agreed, it gets pressure tested in the right way in that value forecasted phase, then ultimately you can never find yourself with a misestimation because you've put your name to it. You've signed the paper as well, just like the finance leader, just like the commercial leader. Then your ability to realize that and track that realization, well, that's like a new problem. But actually, the estimation phase shouldn't be problematic because you shouldn't be building a product that doesn't have an effective pressure-tested T-shirt size. So I think if I'm kind of hearing the question right, I think that's maybe the gap, but I don't know whether I'm reading it right. And but that value forecast that's mutually signed off and agreed between the 3 key parties is really, really important.
Yeah, I don't know whether the question's more generically just like the expectation of what value businesses think will be realized by building AI products, maybe. I'm not too sure. Kevin, if you want to try and clarify that, that would be great. There's a really good question here. We've got only 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes or so left. So if you've got any more questions, please get them in so we can get them answered. So Plamina has asked, where have you seen the fastest adoption of AI internally and what made that part of the org ready for it? Fantastic question. Alex, I'll come to you first.
Okay, I think it is, so it's probably taking us full circle back to the first where we started on adoption, really. It's the fastest adoption I've found is where I take away things that people hate. right? You remove things from their jobs, and Greg said it earlier, and he's absolutely right. Gen AI is really simple to put in to remove large amounts of manual work that people were doing. So anything where I have removed a task that might take somebody weeks, I mean literally weeks to manually do, and they can now press a button and it can do it for them in a couple of minutes, and then they can sense check it, and then they get on with their day. Adoption of that is lightning fast. And it's those targeted pieces, I think, wherever you've got a targeted piece. So anything that can do that. The other piece, I think, anything that allows us as part of the customer journey to speed things up. So we have some large parts of our business where we work with a lot of local authorities, and we get an awful lot of information in on Excel. Everybody loves Excel, right? So the ability to take that information from a lot of organisations that comes in a million different ways and be able to standardise it so our underwriters can respond really quickly has enabled us to move things like looking at cases down from 7 hours a case to a couple of minutes, which means we can respond to the customer faster, the underwriter gets to actually spend the time doing the underwriting much faster. So anything, I think, the highest level of option is where you're removing something that people truly hate, something that's really friction and is not value adding. I think that's where you always get the fastest adoption.
Nice. Indy, have you got an example of where it's worked internally for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the fastest adoption is where the highest impact is, right? So taking away manual work, just like how Alex said, but also making sure that we're making the underwriter's life easy, where we get more code to conversion to submission to code, where there is. I think that's one of the biggest challenging area where we could see adoption quickly. But also insurance is risk business, right? Risk modeling, pricing, claims. These are the areas which are actually revolutionized by using AI, simply because it gives you more probability of to make faster decisions. It just eases you with the amount of data you can crunch over time, manually versus AI, right? So I think these are the areas where internally I feel that the largest adoption is in AI and ML.
I think the other thing that's probably just worth saying is if you can integrate it with something they already use, that helps as well. People don't like having to come out of one thing and into another and out of that and into something else. If you can integrate it into what they already use, add it as a button into their workbench or whatever it may be, if you can integrate it, I think that makes a big difference too.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Greg, are you seeing anything, any kind of trends as it relates to what organisations are able to kind of get adopted quickly, and kind of any relationship between part of the organisation and their readiness?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of effective use cases in marketing, especially around digital marketing teams, because a lot of companies have got huge databases of data that actually are like sufficient to create a decent model. And typically, by nature, digital marketing teams in particular are quite like ready, a bit like in insurance. Pricing like couldn't be more ready for anything data. To Alex's point earlier, like actuarials have been doing this for decades, right? This is just the next evolution of it. So pricing tends to be a really good one, and there's some really big win opportunities there. But yeah, because digital marketers are almost like digital first, data first by nature, and stuff like segmentation, recommendation can be so difficult. E-commerce teams, similar vibe. There's some amazing use cases there. So some of the big retailers that we're working with are seeing really effective use cases in that space.
Nice. Very good. Well, we are just about to wrap up a couple of minutes early. There's a couple more questions, but we'll definitely go over. I know some of you have a hard stop at 3 p.m. So thank you, everybody, for getting involved, your contributions, all your questions. A very insightful and engaging conversation. Indy, Alex, Greg, thank you so much for giving up your time for coming on. Hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for asking all the audience's questions. And yeah, look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks, mate.